You should forget about patricians, consuls, the whiteness of togas, and the speeches of politicians in the Senate. Ahead of you are the hopeless plebeian everyday life and the hustle and bustle of the world. Urine was used for laundry and mouthwash. In ancient Roman times, the maintenance of public baths and latrines was a very lucrative business. Emperor Vespasian even created a new tax on public restrooms, and thus taught his son that money doesn't smell. It was urine, which was a valuable economic resource. It was used for dozens of different purposes, including tanning leather, processing wool, and other fabrics, in dyeing, and as an analog of laundry detergent. The technology of washing looked as follows. Worn clothes were thrown into a vat with urine, trampled with feet, thoroughly rinsed to repel the stench, and clean clothes were obtained. How? It's all about the ammonia contained in the urine, which is known to have the property of bleach. Collecting waste products was an unpresidential but important occupation. Some of them fed public toilets, others collected the finished product from private households. Then it was sold to tanners, dyers, laundries, and horticultural farms, where the valuable ammonia fertilizer was used to feed the pomegranate trees. In addition, some noble and not-so-noble ladies and gentlemen, remembering the whitening properties of the composition, used it to rinse their teeth. The custom was especially popular in the province of Spain. By the way, in 3 modern European languages, French, Italian, and Romanian, urinals installed in public toilets are named after Emperor Vespasian. The ass was wiped with 1 sponge for everyone. Instead of toilet paper, a device called a tersorium, or xylopongium, was used. It was a sponge on a stick, like a reusable burdock. It was used by the whole group. The procedure was as follows. After wiping, the sponge was put in a bucket with brine with a fair share of vinegar, where it safely waited for the next client. If necessary, the device was also used as a plunger to clean a clogged pipe. Obviously, all this was changed infrequently, as the sponge began to crumble from old age. Explosions, floods, and visitors from the sewers. In ancient Rome, public toilets bore little resemblance to modern toilets. They served as a kind of forum where honorable gentlemen and ladies could speak on any subject while doing important business. There were no partitions separating one place from another. A nation of soldiers treated personal space without due piety. In another latrinarium, that was the name of the place, 100 people could sit at a time. Toilet conversations were very confidential. It was believed that in such a position the interlocutor would hardly dare to lie. However, every trip to the restroom was fraught with a number of dangers, and it was not only a rat or a snake lurking in the latrine, but also the possibility of explosion of accumulated gas, primarily methane or hydrogen sulfide. In case the toilet was old and had not been cleaned for a long time, a single spark was enough to blow everything up. We cannot say that these explosions caused death or destruction, but they did cause waxing or burns on the cause. Is it any wonder that the Romans, very pious people, had gods for toilets? Their names were Sterculius, who was in charge of fertilizers, Clocina, who was in charge of sewage, and Crepitus, who was in charge of toilets. All of them were offered sacrifices and gifts. The goddess of luck, Fortuna, was also placed in the toilet. Corrupt firemen. Like any large metropolis, Rome has always been on fire. Nero's Great Fire was by no means the only one. It burned with enviable regularity, and after each fire, everything had to be rebuilt. Ordinary Roman citizens were officially forbidden to have kitchens and fire in apartment buildings. They dined in public canteens. However, this did not save the situation. As soon as a Roman old woman looked with a candle in the toilet, there was a bang, and then fire. Demand gives birth to supply. At one point in the city appeared volunteer fire brigades, night triumvirs. Fires were put out with vinegar-soaked rags, but there was a nuance. Services were paid for, and payment was collected before the fire was extinguished, not after. No cash? Well, no problem. Go borrow from your neighbors, but hurry up while the house is still something left. The most famous squad belonged to Julius Caesar's associate Marcus Crassus. That expanded the business. If the house in no way could not be extinguished, he for pennies purchased rapidly cheapening as the burning property, then rebuilt it and resold not without profit for himself. Is it any wonder that the triumvir Crassus was so damn rich? Radical methods of contraception. Roman women believed that many children were unnecessary. Their wombs should be restrained and limited by any available methods. The methods of birth control were quite varied. For example, they took a solpuga spider, wrapped it in a piece of deerskin, and used it as a pad. And men rubbed juniper on their penis before going on a date. It's hard to say how effective this was. Just in case the spiders and juniper didn't work, there was a more radical method. The point is that Roman law considered a child to be a human being from the moment he or she began to consume solid food instead of mother's milk, that is, he or she was actually torn from the mother's body and flesh. Accordingly, it was possible to abort at a very late stage, after the fetus had already come into the world. Energy drinks made of dung and vinegar. Despite the praise of ancient medicine, Rome did not know many things. So instead of plaster, small wounds preferred to be sealed with dried goat dung collected in spring. Beforehand, this good had to be softened in the mouth with one's own saliva, and then wrapped with a spider's web. The recipe was Greek and was considered very effective. I must say this was not the only way to use goat excrement. Athletes mixed it with vinegar, brought it to a boil, cooled it down a bit, and then drank it instead of a kind of energy drink that increased endurance. It's a specific kind of doping. Fans of goat feces were also charioteers and cattle drivers. It allowed them to stay awake for several days in a row. And Pliny claimed that Emperor Nero liked to drink this drink of the gods. However, there was also a less disgusting way to cheer up. Ash and water were used for this purpose, which facilitated recovery from wounds and again gave vigor to the spirit. Cosmetics and medicines made from the sweat of gladiators. In addition to fights for public amusement, these predecessors of modern fights without rules also had a practical use in the field of public medicine. After the fights, the scientific staff smeared the winner with oil and scraped it off with a special scraper. The mixture of sweat, blood, fat, and dead skin was corked into bottles and sold to Roman women as a cream to make the ladies irresistible. Ointment mostly on the face, but the most wealthy beauties bought bottles of this nasty stuff in bulk. Blood was also used. It was decanted from wounds to sell as a cure for migraines and epileptic seizures. Double benefit, along with blood, dirt, and primary suppuration, were squeezed out of the wound. And the fighter's owners could make a nice profit. Rotten fish sauce. Representations of the inhabitants of the ancient world about useful food were somewhat unusual for our taste. For example, most of the dishes were dressed with fish sauce, which was called garum. It was made very simply. Small fish, not worthy of serving on its own, was placed in a barrel with brine. After that, the barrel was rolled out to the sun and left there for several months, up to half a year. During this period, the fish turned into a brown, smelly slurry. The unforgettable flavor of this sauce, which was suitable as a seasoning for any dish, radically enhancing the taste, made it impossible to prepare it in the city. It had to be made in the provinces, and the finished product was brought to the capital of the world, sealed with wax in specially shaped ceramic bottles.